My name is Amjid Bashir. This is the story of my late father, Haji Bashir Ahmed, for the Colourful Heritage project. My father was born in Karachi, and his father, who was in the British Indian Army, he was a man with a lot of wealth. So my father grew up with a lot of brothers and sisters, and they grew up in quite extreme poverty. And when my father eventually wanted to come to the UK, my grandfather actually sold a bit of land that he had. Not all of it, just some of it. And my mother sold her jewellery so they could have afford the airfare to come over. But once my father came here, and I was told from uncles, he really struggled. I mean, typically he was living in a house with 20 other people, and he'd often sort of talk about, they were living in a one-bedroom house where the floor was covered with mattresses, and 20 people were sleeping there. And this is the difficulties he had. And I think he was very much a family man, and despite having the difficulties, he was constantly sending money back to his family, not only to support my mother, but also to support his extended families. He was one of about 8 children.
Family loving, cooperating, helping others, cooperating with everybody, and a pillar in the family. It was a kind of a bond. He kept the whole family and people. I can't remember anybody who really got annoyed with him or cross with him, had any argument with him, in good days and bad days, in business, in family affairs. He was a leader. Everybody followed him because of his qualities. With the God-given gifts of tolerance and love for youngsters and older, mashallah, he used all these qualities very well, and he kept the whole big extended family very close to each other. There were no such function, I can remember, when there were anybody absent from the function until the Haji Sahib lived. So his family did very well. The boys, mashallah, went strength to strength. They opened more businesses, invested abroad, and all kind of thing. And Haji Sahib took a role as a the family man to look after all the business in the family. He took his wife to Hajj to pay, mashallah, a few times for Umrah and Hajj, and by that time he's become a statesman of the family. So we all used to look for it. Anybody who had got any problem, whether it's social, family, domestic, financial, we all used to go to Haji Sahib. And Haji Sahib, with his God-given, mashallah, qualities, he'll advise to everybody. He had made this country his home, especially he loved Scotland, because he was so settled here. All his children were almost Scottish. We adopted the Scottish way of life. We loved the local football team. We loved the local everything. Wherever he was carrying a flag for Scotland, mashallah. So at the last minute, all his life he's been saying to his children and to everybody that if I passed away, send my body back to Pakistan, where I can be rest amongst my forefathers and all my family members. But then at the end, with the love of Scotland and with the love of his family, that was the last decision he diverted. He said, no, let me stay in Scotland when I'm dead. So he was buried in a cemetery in Glasgow.
Anybody that met him, they just fell in love with him. I remember him fondly talking about his managers or his supervisors and stuff, and even when I was older, he used to say that I used to get any kind of work I wanted and stuff because I had a really good rapport with my the superiors and stuff and everything. And my dad actually helped other people get jobs because my dad had a good reference with them. See, when I was younger, and the other thing I remember with my dad is that my dad was such a, not just working outside, he was hands-on in the house as well. He'd fix things, do things, decorate the house, wallpaper, paint, everything. And even remember my dad, my dad and his few friends, they put the front room window in, and they actually, and I was amazed as a child even, thinking, oh my God, how are they going to put that window in? But they actually did it, and they put the window in and stuff and everything. my dad's worked in Rolls-Royce for a while, but I remember him coming home and my mom was really upset because my dad's hands were full of blisters and he had been working so hard. The earliest memories I have of my dad is that he was such a kind and kind of happy. He was so funny, you know. He used to make so many people, his children, everybody laugh and stuff. He had a really good sense of humor and stuff. But he was so generous. I think that was when, without a doubt, that how his generosity was so overwhelming. You know, in those days you couldn't really afford toys so much. So a novelty was, you know, when you got a toy once a year or something.
The entrepreneurial streak within my father made him want to do a bit more than just working. So eventually he came across a business opportunity whereby he bought a cafe, an English type of cafe that sold English food. And as soon as he bought it, and I remember I was about 13 years old and I would help him there. But as soon as he bought it, business started to go down because the clientele was mainly English. And they didn't like the fact that there was an Asian who was serving English food. And slowly, bit by bit, the clientele went down. And my father, alhamdulillah, he was always hardworking, and he was always, whenever he had a challenge, he would always turn it into a strength. And he's introduced things like samosas, Indian food, but he also introduced a pool table, and he brought a couple of pinball games and video games, and suddenly the cafe started to get very busy, and a lot of young Pakistanis would frequent it. My dad was a bit concerned about the fact that there was this atmosphere being created within the cafe that wasn't conducive to a good upbringing for his children. And eventually he sold the cafe. And I remember times when the business was so bad that he'd come home and he wouldn't have any notes. There would just be coins. My father persevered, and when he introduced those games, alhamdulillah, sales became very busy. The shop became very busy, and when he sold it, people thought he was crazy for selling it, but his sole reason was really to protect his sons and his children from that kind of environment. And he recognized at that point that upbringing was probably not the best interest for us. My father went to visit my uncle, and while he was here, he was speaking to my uncle's father, who was also a relative. And my uncle's father started to talk about how business was and how the situation was very different, the people were very different. And my father was quite fascinated. And he also saw it as an opportunity to kind of move away from the cafe and sort of bring his children into a better lifestyle. And a couple of months later, and my father was only in Glasgow for a couple of days, but when he returned back to Derby, he decided that he wanted to sell the cafe. And because the cafe at that point was doing really well, he sold it very quickly. And about a couple of months later, my uncle's father passed away, and he came to Glasgow with a view to help my uncle out because they were going to go to Pakistan to bury my uncle's father. And he helped out in the shop for a few weeks, and he fell in love with Glasgow. He fell in love with the people here. He fell in love with the business environment, and he decided there and then that he's going to move to Glasgow. And during that trip, he actually spoke to another relative who was thinking about selling his business, and they made a deal to buy the very first shop my father owned, which was in Copeland Road, hence the reason why we all sport Rangers. And you know, within a month or so, he had moved up, and he had moved up alone with my uncle and my younger brother Abid. The rest of the family followed about 2 months later, and myself and my older sister, we followed a year later because we were in the midst of GCSEs. But those initial days, again, you know, sometimes when you go into business, things don't always go according to plan. And we suddenly had, after my father bought the business, suddenly there was fierce competition with a rival, and business started to go pretty bad, and it started to go south, and sales started to drop. And my father came up with the idea of selling night papers. and he extended the hours, and the shop was open till 1 o'clock. And eventually when I got there, and my younger brothers, we were working there till 1 o'clock. And alhamdulillah, my father again started to make the business work. So despite the challenges, he turned it around. And eventually what happened is it got to the point that either we bought our rival out or they bought us out. Luckily they bought us out, and that gave my father the sort of resources to go on and open up more shops and the news box chain. He wouldn't compromise his religious values. So from an early age he taught us that alcohol you cannot go near. You cannot go near things like bacon. And he was really clear about that. And then within a year, he bought the very first news box in Waterloo Street. And that was almost around about 1988, 89. And again, it was there was nothing haram in there at all. And with 2 shops, he finally had, you know, he was doing really well. And he went on to kind of guide the rest of us into opening more sort of news boxes, and alhamdulillah, it got to a point where my father was, you know, we could have made a lot of money. My father could have made a lot of money selling alcohol, and he would have reps coming to him. He would have cash and carry guys saying to him, look, you should expand your business, you're going to increase it. But he was really principled, and he didn't want to he didn't want to forego his religious values, and he was very strict in what he kind of believed in, and I think this is where it rubs off on the rest of us, because he taught us about ethics. He said, look, to make money you don't have to compromise on your values, your deen. And he said, look, do the right thing, never cheat anyone. And alhamdulillah, me, my brothers, my brother-in-law, whatever we do in business, we always try and do the right thing. And he's always there guiding us. You know, his principles are still there within us. And in fact, for me, he's my biggest inspiration to what I do. The difficulties that the first generation faced. I was fortunate enough that I'm old enough that I actually saw them. And I remember things like having a bath in a tin bath. I remember things of, you know, not having an indoor bathroom, having an outhouse. I remember going to farms with my father and getting chickens and, you know, slaughtering them in the backyard when it was allowed at that time. And not only that, my father, one of the other things he did was he was always working, and it was always to the betterment of his family. There were times when I'd be working in the shop till 1 o'clock in the evening, and I'd have an exam in the morning, and I would sort of take an hour out, and at the back of the shop, amongst all the tins of beans, I'd be sitting on a sofa studying, and if it got really busy, I'd have to go out, and we'd even have to, me and my younger brothers would go around the pub selling papers at 12 a.m. This is midnight. When my father passed away, I was determined that I wanted to do more for my father. And I read the hadith, and I was told about the hadith about 3 things that benefit the deceased when they passed away. One of the things was about charity, giving in charity. The other one was about education, educating people. The third one that really struck with me was good deeds of pious children. And I was told that anything I do that was a good deed, my father would benefit. And it kind of spurred me that I'm going to try and do as much as I can while I'm alive, with the intention that my father can gain. Work hard, help others, be generous, and don't hurt people. And that's the key thing that I think he would have said. Don't take the shortcut. Do the right thing, and, you know, be generous. Be kind to those around you. My father was, you know, he was very clear in what he wanted to do. And the message is really simply, be a good Muslim.